Welcome to Korean History Channel Behind Palace Walls. This video is a non-fiction content reconstructed based on historical facts and events. Some scenes may have been dramatized to aid viewer understanding.
After the Manchu Invasion, 500,000 Joseon people were dragged to Qing. Their tragic fate sold in slave markets and the cold indifference of the Joseon government. January 30th, 1637, a winter day when the Han River was frozen solid. King Injo of Joseon opened the gates of Namhansanseong fortress and stood before the surrender altar, Suhangdan, built on Samjeondo hill. The triple kowtow ceremony, bowing 3 times and knocking his head 9 times before Qing Emperor Taizong. That moment marked the beginning of the worst humiliation in 500 years of Joseon history. But the real tragedy began after that. The king returned to the palace after surrender, but 500,000 Joseon people were dragged to Qing to become slaves. And what happened there was a hell beyond imagination. 10 years before the Manchu Invasion in 1627, Joseon had already been invaded once by later Jin, the predecessor of Qing. It was the Zhongmyo Horan. At that time, Joseon endured humiliation by forming a brotherhood pact. However, the Seoan anti-peace faction, the mainstream force in the Joseon court, could not accept this. Moderates like Choi Myong-gil argued for facing reality, but hardliners led by Kim Sung-hyun insisted on a hardline, saying, "We cannot live under the same sky as barbarians." In 1636, when Hong Taiji of later Jin changed the name to Qing and proclaimed himself emperor, demanding Joseon accept a lord-vassal relationship, Injo refused. The pretext was maintaining loyalty to Ming dynasty, but in reality, Injo, whose political legitimacy was weak, had no choice but to rely on nominal justifications. In December 1636, Emperor Taizong of Qing personally led 120,000 troops across the Yalu River. Joseon's resistance was futile. Qing forces swept south like a tidal wave, and within just 2 weeks, Hwanhyang was surrounded. Injo tried to flee quickly to Gangwon Island, just as King Seonjo had done during the Japanese invasions. However, Qing forces were already crossing the Han River. Eventually, Injo fled to Namhansanseong fortress with the crown prince. Meanwhile, the queen, the royal grandson, later King Hwanhyangnyeo, and many royals headed for Gangwon Island. What happened to the people of Hwanhyang and the Gyeonggi region at this time? No one told them to evacuate. Only the king and Yangban fled hastily. When Qing forces stormed in, hundreds of thousands of commoners fell into enemy hands. Injo and court ministers isolated in Namhansanseong held out for 47 days. Inside the fortress were about 13,000 soldiers and officials, but there was only 50 days' worth of food. In the dead of winter, starvation and disease spread. Outside the fortress, even more horrific events were unfolding. Qing forces ravaged all 8 provinces of Joseon, capturing people indiscriminately. Those who resisted were killed. Those who complied were bound. Men were taken as labor, women as sex slaves. On January 22, 1637, Gangwon Island fell. An army led by Qing General Yonggol-dai crossed the frozen Gap-got ferry to attack Gangwon Island. Kim Gyeong-jing, in charge of Gangwon Island's defense, was utterly incompetent. Far from preparing for battle, he was drinking with courtesans. When Qing forces landed, Gangwon Island instantly became hell. Royals in Yangban took their own lives to avoid humiliation. Kang Bin, Injo's daughter-in-law, committed suicide, followed by countless Yangban women. But common people were different. They had neither the luxury nor the choice to commit suicide. They were captured by Qing forces and became prisoners. On Gangwon Island alone, tens of thousands were taken prisoner. Upon hearing this news, Injo finally decided to surrender. There was no longer any justification or hope to hold out. On January 30th, that day of humiliation arrived. Injo removed his blue royal robe and changed into the blue clothes worn by Qing vassals. Then he walked to the surrender altar prepared at Samjeondo. Performed the triple kowtow. Following Emperor Taizong's command, Injo bowed 3 times and struck his forehead to the ground 9 times. The king of Joseon knelt before the barbarian emperor. Beside him, Crown Prince So-yeon and Grand Prince Bongram also bowed together. The surrender ceremony did not end there. Emperor Taizong of Qing presented harsh conditions to Joseon. First, sever relations with Ming dynasty and serve Qing. Second, send Crown Prince Soyeon, Grand Prince Bongram, and other princes and ministers' sons as hostages. Third, pay enormous war reparations and tribute. But the most terrible condition was separate. The Joseon people already captured by Qing forces would be taken to Qing as they were. Injo accepted all these conditions to preserve his throne. On February 24th, Qing forces began to withdraw. But behind that procession, a horrific scene unfolded. Hundreds of thousands of Joseon people were tied with ropes, following the Qing army. According to records of the time, Joseon prisoners taken by Qing forces are estimated at minimum 500,000, maximum 600,000. Since Joseon's population was about 10 million then, 5 to 6% of the entire population was dragged away at once. Their procession was hell itself. In the dead of winter, they had to walk without proper clothing. The elderly and children collapsed while walking, and Qing soldiers killed them mercilessly. Young women were violated by Qing soldiers every night. What awaited the prisoners who crossed the Yalu River and arrived in Shenyang was even greater hell. Qing treated Joseon prisoners as spoils of war. Large-scale slave markets opened in Shenyang and Beijing. Joseon people were sold like livestock. Nadeok Haeyeon's record, Samjeondo, written as Joseon envoy to Qing, describes this horrific scene. Joseon people were tied up like cattle and horses in the market. Hagglers checked people's teeth, felt their limbs examining health. Young women were stripped to have their bodies examined. The cries of mothers and children being sold to different owners pierced the heavens. Prices were set. Healthy young men cost 30-40 taels of silver, young women 50-60 taels, elderly or children under 10 taels. More shocking was that some buyers of Joseon prisoners were Joseon people themselves. Joseon people who had naturalized to Qing early or wealthy Joseon merchants bought their own people, some to rescue family, others for profit. Young women met the most miserable fate. They became concubines of Qing soldiers or officials, or were even sold to Mongol tribes. At that time, Qing sometimes gave Joseon women as gifts to Mongol tribes to maintain alliance. According to records, thousands of Joseon women were dragged to Mongolian steppes. What happened there? Mongol nomads sometimes shared Joseon women among multiple men, because they had the custom of brothers taking one woman as wife. For women raised in Joseon's Confucian culture, this was unimaginable humiliation. There are even more horrific records. When food ran short in Qing military camps, they even killed and ate Joseon prisoners. A testimony from a Joseon person who was captured by Qing forces and escaped is recorded in Yolyosil Gisul. Starving Qing soldiers killed old and sick Joseon people and boiled their flesh to eat. Children were no exception. They called human flesh lamb meat. Is this an exaggerated record? Unfortunately, similar testimonies appear in various documents. Cannibalism during war amid extreme food shortages appears to have actually occurred. Meanwhile, what did the Joseon court do? After returning to the palace, Injo made almost no effort to rescue the people who had become prisoners. Instead, he sent all kinds of precious items for Crown Prince Soyeon and Grand Prince Bongram held hostage in Qing. For about 8 years from 1637 to 1645, the Joseon court conducted a prisoner repatriation project called Sokwan Sayop. However, the subjects were mainly people from Yangban families. The court sent envoys to Qing to buy prisoners with silver, but the amount paid differed by status. For Yangban, up to 100 taels of silver per person was paid, but for commoners, only 30 taels. For slaves, only 10 taels. In the end, only about 40,000 prisoners were repatriated over 8 years. Less than 10% of 500,000. The remaining 400,000 plus either died as slaves in Qing or were assimilated as Qing people. A greater tragedy befell those who returned. Female prisoners especially were branded as Hwanhyangnyeo, returned women. They were ostracized from society for having lost chastity to Qing men. Women who became Hwanhyangnyeo could not return to their original families. Husbands would not accept them. Families considered them shameful. Some women were even stoned by villagers. The Joseon government took measures allowing Hwanhyangnyeo to remarry, but the social stigma was not erased. Many Hwanhyangnyeo became courtesans or fell to lowborn status. Some said it was better to remain in Qing and did not return. According to records by Kang Seong, who went to Qing as Crown Prince Soyeon's attendant, many women refused to return to Joseon. Though slaves in Qing, they could survive, whereas returning to Joseon meant facing humiliation worse than death. The real victims of the Manchu invasion were not the king nor ministers. They were the nameless 500,000 common people. Injo maintained his throne even after surrender. Most Yangban ministers preserved their positions. Even Kim Gyeongjing, who failed to defend Ganghwa Island, initially avoided punishment, though later executed under public pressure. Meanwhile, the people lost everything. They lost family, lost hometown, lost even human dignity. Joseon society greatly changed after the Manchu invasion. Resentment and shame toward Qing led to Northern Expedition theory. But this did not lead to actual military action. It was merely Yangban nominal theory. Real change occurred in the people's hearts. Trust in the state and king collapsed. What use is a nation that abandons its people in crisis? This distrust became reform demands during the reigns of Yongzhou and Zhongzhou, 100 years later, and became one cause of late Joseon period civil uprisings. History records. The king's surrender remained as humiliation of Samjeondo. But the tragedy of 500,000 people did not even gain a proper name. They remained merely as numbers, as statistics. In 2024, the site where Samjeondo surrender altar stood has become an apartment complex in Songpa-gu, Seoul. Only the Samjeondo monument stands forlornly beside Seokcheon Lake. The monument is inscribed with praise for Emperor Taizong of Qing, a monument of humiliation that Joseon erected itself. But nowhere on that monument is the story of 500,000 people. No names of those sold in slave markets, who died in distant lands, who were ostracized even upon return. History is written by victors, but pain is always the lot of the weak. This is the real lesson the Manchu invasion left us. Thank you for watching. We'll return with more fascinating stories and intriguing topics. Behind Palace Walls, thank you.